All right, ladies, this screencast is going to start with Jay's Treaty, which, depending on where your class left off, you may have gotten through this topic, so feel free to fast forward. So, with the conflict between us and England over the issue of them stealing our cargo, attacking our ships bound for France, impressing our sailors, Washington wants to avoid war with England, because we just fought and won a war against them with the American Revolution. So he will send a diplomat, an American diplomat, to England to negotiate peace. The man he sends is John Jay, and you see him pictured. Jay will spend multiple years, actually, in England trying to work out a negotiation, a peaceful compromise with England. And when he returns, he has a treaty in hand named Jay's Treaty, which, to be frank, is seen as a complete sellout to the English because it's absolutely a disaster of a treaty. And here are some of the parts of this Jay's Treaty, so you tell me what you think about this treaty tomorrow. Some of the parts of this treaty. England is allowed to confiscate, meaning steal, all goods headed to France from U.S. ships. Yes, we are giving England permission to take our stuff if it was in fact headed for France, and that is on paper. Now, if our goods were headed to another European country, they would be responsible for repaying us anything lost. But if it's headed to France, it's fair for the taking, which is just a terrible agreement in general. The second part of this treaty was that England had to remove all of its British troops from forts in the American states, and this is something that they were already supposed to have done. That should sound like deja vu because this was part of the Treaty of Paris 1783. So they still have yet to actually remove all British soldiers from the American territory. And I don't know what makes us think they'll do it this time, but we decided to include that in the treaty as well. The treaty is just really weak. It doesn't mention anything about even impressments and what's happening with the American sailors. So overall, this doesn't address our important issues, and it's just kind of seen as a way to maintain peace with England, but we're completely selling out to them and giving them what they want. Washington will only serve 2 terms in office, so he serves a total of 8 years as president. He kind of sets that precedent because other presidents in the future will follow his lead with that. Actually, it's not until FDR that any president serves longer than 2 terms. There's no limit at this time, but he just kind of makes that decision for himself. In his farewell address to his cabinet and to Congress, he warns against 2 things moving forward: political parties and getting involved in foreign affairs. As you can imagine, we didn't follow those 2 pieces of advice very well because we have political parties today, and we definitely do meddle in European affairs and worldly affairs today. We did try to obey the stick out of foreign policy stuff or foreign affairs stuff for a while, but eventually it becomes too much. But the political parties thing, we're just going to jump right into that because the 2 political parties and the first political parties of this country are already emerging. Okay, so the crash course video kind of explained some of the generalities between the first party system, which is the Federalist Party, versus the Democratic Republicans. The Federalist Party consisted of merchants, wealthy Englishmen, manufacturers, typically Northerners, and the face of the Federalist Party was, of course, Alexander Hamilton. Whereas the Democratic Republicans typically consisted of planters, farmers, frontiersmen, people going beyond the original 13 states like westward, Southerners traditionally, because that's where most of your farming society is, and Thomas Jefferson is the head of this Democratic Republican Party. Each party is representing a different vision that people have for America. You know, are we going the more manufacturing merchant business route that Alexander Hamilton wants to take us through, or are we going to be a farming agrarian society for the rest of our country's development. That's what Thomas Jefferson wants. Well, nonetheless, we will have our second presidential election, which is actually an election this time, and John Adams, a Federalist, will win. So John Adams is our second president. Now, Adams is a president, unfortunately, of controversy. Some things happen underneath his presidency that politically mess him up a little bit. So during his presidency, the Federalist-controlled Congress, because there were more Federalists in the House and Senate, passed two very controversial pieces of legislation, and that's the Alien and Sedition Acts. So one's the Alien Act, one's the Sedition Act. The Alien Act allows the president to deport dangerous aliens. Aliens are foreigners, non-American settlers. So pretty much any president can say, and in this case John Adams can say, oh, they're dangerous, we gotta deport them, they have to be kicked out. This just gives the president a lot of power, very much expands the role of the president, because the Constitution doesn't say anything about the president having the ability to kick people out of the country freely. The Sedition Act is the second act. Sedition means treason, or crimes against the government, okay? The Sedition Act officially prohibited the speech or publication of any sort of attack or criticism against the president, Congress, U.S. federal government. So you couldn't say or print anything that was attacking anyone in government. Well, this is a clear and direct violation of the First Amendment. So a lot of people, particularly people in Jefferson's corner who are very concerned about individual rights and states' rights, have problems with these two pieces of laws. These two laws specifically, these two pieces of legislation. So these two acts are happening under John Adams' presidency. They're causing a lot of controversy and conflict in the U.S. this time. Checks and balances don't stop these laws from passing. And, in fact, we know that it's the Supreme Court that has the power today to determine whether or not a law is constitutional and can actually throw it out. But the Constitution did not give the Supreme Court that power, so that's coming later. So there's no one in the federal government who could say, nope, we're not, you can't have that. So that's, and you have to kind of veto that law because that's unconstitutional. Since there's no one who has that power in the federal government, the states are going to start taking that upon themselves. And we see this first example with the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. This is kind of tying into the Alien and Sedition Acts a little bit, kind of an effect. So the states of Kentucky and Virginia both declare that the Alien and Sedition Acts are unconstitutional. And they are not going to recognize these laws in their states. They basically say, nope, these laws are not just or lawful. They go against the Constitution, particularly the Sedition Act. So we are not going to apply them to our country, and we are not going to obey them. This kind of inserts the idea that a state has the power or authority to decide whether or not a law is constitutional. And if it was, they could void or nullify. To nullify is to void a law. And because the Constitution doesn't address because like I said, the Supreme Court, we know today the Supreme Court is the institution that has the right to determine constitutionality of a law, but back then that wasn't established. So the states assume if the federal government doesn't have that power, we do, which is not the case, but they're going to take it for a while, and it's just going to kind of remain a constant issue. So we're going to pick up with the election of 1800 tomorrow in class, and if you have any questions, let me know. We'll continue with those notes. Hope you all have a good afternoon.